Hi, AP Seminar students. It's Mr. Z here. Today's video is going to be an overview and some tips and tricks about the end of course exam, which will currently be happening on May 5th at noon. So, what's in this video today? First, we're going to go through an overview of the AP Seminar final exam directions and scoring guidelines. We'll take a look at those rubrics. Then I will be sharing this document with you. This is over on Google Classroom, located right here, EOC one pager. And on this one pager, it has just a one page view of the directions, what you are to do. Rubrics are linked in here. It has the weights for each part of the end of course exam, and also has links to a sample that I'm going to have you view. And it has high, medium, and low scoring student responses. After this video is over and after you have a good idea of how to approach this AP Seminar final exam, the substitute teacher should be giving you a practice end of course exam part A, sweatshops benefit children, and part B, which is the four sources with the theme of food. So you'll be reading both of those, and then you'll be completing your written response by handwriting the response, just like you do for the end of course exam. So let's dive into this stuff. First thing first, as we look at our end of course exam, it is around 120 minutes long, so exactly 2 hours long. There are two different parts. There is what's called the part A and the part B. The part A, oops, the part A is one source that you have to read. And within that source, you have to be tracking the author's argument. So your goal is to identify the author's main idea, argument, or thesis. That is question 1 to 2 sentences. What's the main idea of the entire source? Question 2 is a multiple paragraph response where you are explaining the author's line of reasoning by identifying the claims that they made throughout their argument and identifying how they connect their ideas from one to another. And so really this is going to be tracking the author's claims and understanding the order of these claims and making sense of them. Sometimes these are disorganized, sometimes they're organized well. That is your job to evaluate whether or not it is effective and organized and whether or not ideas are connected effectively or not. Lastly, for question 3 for the part A, you are going to be evaluating the effectiveness of evidence. And what they mean by that is you look at the evidence that's used throughout the argument, and your goal is to determine, is this evidence credible? Is it relevant to the claim being made? And is there sufficient evidence to support the argument? So if you would like to really, really quickly, go ahead and pause my video and you can take a look at the end of course rubric now. What I want you to do with this rubric is really break it down and determine what are the keys to success for this high scoring row. Go ahead and pause the video and then you can pick it back up whenever you are done reviewing that rubric. Okay, so you are finished up with reviewing that rubric, and you've really noticed that there are a couple of keys to success with this part A. So, as we read, a key to success is going to be doing our says, does annotations while reading. On one side of the text, what is the author actually saying? On the other side, what part of the argument is the author currently in? So identifying claims on that right-hand side of the page, identifying evidence that's used, versus on the left side, you're just kind of summarizing the main idea of each body paragraph. Once you've read through the entire piece, there's a sample linked in here if you would like to take a look at it. EOCA, this one is about public libraries. You can see it's relatively short. It's about a page and a half, but you're trying to identify the main idea of the entire article, not the first paragraph, but the entire article. That is for question 1 there. So identifying that main idea of the entire piece. And then as you are reading as well, ensuring that you're tracking those claims that you see throughout. And oftentimes we know that claims are going to be at the start of any new paragraph. They're going to be either shifting to a new claim or building upon a previous claim. So that's a good place to look for those claims as you move through this exam. Also, as you are reading, the questions you want to look for and ask yourself are, is the evidence that's being used, is it credible? Which means, are there credibility lead-ins? Do they give background about the sources that they're using to support their argument? You can always criticize if they don't, or you can always applaud them or say that they did an effective job with evidence if they are including credible evidence. Also, you want to check, is it relevant to the point they're making? Some evidence that's used might not be relevant to a claim, or it might be very relevant. So you want to tell me that as you are kind of reading and annotating, identifying effective versus ineffective uses of evidence. And then lastly, is it sufficient, right? Is there enough evidence to prove a claim? Those can all be things that you use to write about in your response to question 3 here. And then lastly, any sort of issues with the argument as a whole that you identify as you read or flaws with the argument, definitely write those things down as you read and annotate. And then you should be able to really fully elaborate on each one of these questions. So the approach for the part A is as followed. They recommend about 30 minutes, but you can take up to 40 is what I would recommend. The first 7 to 12 minutes you want to spend reading the source. Again, doing what I just had discussed, reading and says does annotating, identifying the main idea of the entire article, tracking each claim, really figuring out how many claims are made and what are the claims that are used to support the argument, and then understanding, is the argument flawed in any way? Also, are the claims connected to one another? If so, how are they connected? And then as you are reading as well, really looking at the evidence that's used. Is it credible? Is it sufficient? And is it relevant? So 7 to 12 minutes really breaking down the argument. Then you approach each question. You answer each question on a separate page of paper. They're labeled at the top of those written response sheets. Again, question 1 to 3 sentences that explains the main idea or thesis of the entire piece. So if you wanted to take a look at a sample here, you can see the high scoring example for the end of course A. The author's main argument is that although libraries are threatened by a lack of funding, they are an integral part of the American social fabric, and they might help to bridge the digital divide, though through striving equity of access. So libraries can be a place for people to access information, and they can be more equitable. But sadly, they are threatened due to a lack of funding is the main idea of this entire piece. So there's a sample for you to take a look at right there for question 1. Now, question 2 is a little bit more complicated. It is a multi-paragraph response. And if you just scroll down in that high-scoring sample, you can get an idea of how long you should be writing. This person looks like they filled up about 2 pages of writing. Whenever you are reading this and analyzing this high-scoring sample, some of those keys to success on question 2 are going to be as follows. Do you first explain the main idea, just like you did in part 1? Then you're really evaluating how clear the line of reasoning is. So how many claims are made? Are they strong claims? Are they presented in a logical manner? Or might they not be presented in a logical manner? You're really going through and chronologically identifying each claim made. So the author's first claim to support their argument is this. Then you elaborate, whether that is clear, unclear, strong support for their argument or weaker support. You're kind of looking at the claims that are being made. Then how is that claim connected to the next claim? Identify the next one. I would say this is anywhere between 3 and 6 paragraphs normally, where you're really just identifying claims and then going through and determining, is this organized in a clear-cut way or not? And then lastly, and if you want to see samples, again, those are linked in here in that one page where you can read a student high scoring response. Now, lastly here, question 3 is a multiple paragraph response again, and it's going to ask you to evaluate the evidence that's being used by the author. And if we've been tracking that well as we read, you simply are explaining each claim throughout the argument, and you're determining the evidence that's used underneath each claim. You can name the type of evidence, right? Is it an anecdote? Is it statistical evidence? Is it a testimonial as evidence? Are those uses of evidence credible? So do we know the background of the source or the author that is being used to support the argument? If not, you can say it's ineffective evidence. If yes, they are credible, tell me what makes them credible. A second thing, we are really making sure that those pieces of evidence are relevant to the claim being made. So they're not using it in a relevant way. you want to know that it's related to the point they're trying to make. If it is, then you can lift that up as a strength of the evidence used. If it's not really relevant, definitely talk about it's not relevant and explain why throughout your response. And then lastly, is there sufficient evidence? Like we know, some claims are bigger than others. If there's a large claim and a bold claim, is there enough support? Do they have multiple pieces of evidence, or might it be lacking? If they have a lot of evidence, you would say that it's sufficient to support the claim. And if there's not a ton of evidence, you would say that it lacks sufficiency in some way. So those are kind of the tips and the strategy for the part A. If you want to go ahead and pause the video and work through your part A, the practice one again that you'll be getting in class is called Sweatshops Benefit Children. You go ahead and pause my video and you can work through that part now. Whenever you're ready, you can pick the video back up here and I'll be talking through part 2, which is the part B. Okay, so if you've paused the video, welcome back. We are also going to be talking about the Part B for the end of course exam. So the Part B is worth around 70% of your score. So this is going to be the question we really want to make sure we are ready for. It's simply a written argument. We've been writing arguments all year, so I trust that you have a lot of the basic skills to form a thesis statement supported by claims and evidence. But how are we going to form this argument? What is this argument going to be about? Well, that's based on the 4 sources. So what College Board does is they give you 4 sources of information. You read each one. Just like our performance task 2, there is a theme or a concept or an idea that is connected within all of the sources. You can look at the sample here. The theme is motivation. If you would like to kind of skim through that and get an idea, you may do so. There's also high, medium, and low scoring responses. And then the practice one that you are going to be writing about, the theme is about food. So different ways to improve food and reduce food waste. So go ahead and take a minute. If you want to pull up the rubric for a second, just to clarify any directions, go ahead and pause this video and make sure you are moving through this rubric and identifying what it takes to receive a high score. So if you have done that, the keys to success on Part B are going to be very, very similar to our performance task 2 and the stimulus materials that we work through. You have 4 short sources, and you're going to want to read and identify the main idea of each source, and then identify what is the theme or the concept that's connecting all of them. So a good recommendation for how to do that is just take a scratch piece of paper, as you can see here. Write out each source in a corner or in a quadrant of the paper. Write down the main idea and any evidence that you see that you think is relevant. And then in the center, you can write the theme and you can kind of form what your argument's going to be. So again, there's going to be one theme that ties all of these together, and your goal is going to be to write an argument, a personal argument with a unique perspective based on what you learned from those 4 sources. Now, that's not all. If you were reviewing the rubric here, you know that you have to really have a clear argument. So you want a thesis statement, you want some claims to support your argument, and you want to find evidence to support those claims. Now, where do you locate those pieces of evidence? You actually find those within the 4 sources themselves. So you want to synthesize or connect at least 2 of the sources from the 4 that you're given. You want to utilize evidence from at least 2 of those within your response. So again, you want to making sure that you are synthesizing and utilizing at minimum 2 of the sources. If you can utilize 3, you can do that as well. So as we are moving through these keys to success, we know that in order to get there, we're going to need to read, analyze, annotate those different sources, and really get those main ideas and get that theme figured out early on. Once you are done with really reading and analyzing the sources, you then want to move into your own stance. So form your own thesis. You then kind of briefly outline an argument that will support that thesis, and you determine what are the 2 sources you can use and what is the evidence you're going to use from those sources to support your claims. Then, again, you are writing your response and you are synthesizing those 2 sources. When you reference them in your response, you want to say source A, source B, Source C, if you can use credibility lead-ins, definitely do that. You know that that's a good writing move. Have a clear line of reasoning, so definitely connecting your ideas in a logical way. First this, then this, then this. Prove your point. And anytime you can add commentary or your own personal knowledge, you are welcome to do that. You can use that to clarify, conclude, and connect to your argument in some way. So, like I said before, it's an hour and a half for the entire exam. The part B, what is recommended is around an hour and 20 minutes to an hour and 30 minutes. So the stages and the approach that I would take to move through the part B are as follows. The first stage is reading and analysis of those sources. And I would read and says does, just like you did for the part A, identifying the parts of the argument, main idea, evidence used. I would use this quadrant approach, or at least a scratch sheet of paper, to get the main idea of each source so that you're clear on what that theme is later on. Once you've identified the main idea, you can write down the theme. If you use the quadrant sheets, write down the theme in the center, or if you're using scratch sheets, just make sure you write that theme down. Now, once you've identified the theme, you know you have to write an argument. And in order to have a strong line of reasoning, we have to plan out our argument. So I think a mini outline is something that you can do on a scratch sheet of paper where you just write down your thesis, you write down your claims, and that's when you're going to want to start to figure out what evidence can I use to support my argument. So looking back to the sources, source A, B, C, or D, what evidence can you use where to support your unique perspective or your argument? Now, this is definitely easier said than done, but one thing to keep in mind is our solutions buckets that we talked about when it came to the part B. You know that government action can be offered as an argument. Maybe that is related to the theme you've identified in the four sources, arguing for increased laws, social programs, subsidies, regulations, maybe some more oversight or committees. You could argue for individual change, so people do something individually to alter their practices. You could argue for some sort of expansion of technology or altering technology if that is what the theme allows for. If lack of education is something, you could definitely argue for an increased education or access to information, or some sort of new advocacy group or social movement to spread the word about this unknown topic or problem, if that's what the theme allows for. And lastly, we know that we can argue unique solutions by changing existing institutions if that is part of the problem. So almost on your scratch sheet of paper, what you want to form is something like this. Your main idea or thesis. What is your argument based on the four sources? It should be a unique argument that is not present in the source. Then kind of scratching out your 2 to 4 main reasons why, your claims, and then finding out which pieces of evidence from what source might help you to support each claim. So again, you're taking about 15 minutes to plan that response. Your general thesis and idea, at least 3 claims, and then evidence from your different sources, at minimum 2 sources to support that argument. And then lastly, you want to take about 40 to 60 minutes, so that last hour of the exam, to really draft out this argument. And this is something that, though it is a time crunch here, if you organize well up to this point, you should be able to get a basic argument out with your clear thesis statement and unique solution, and you should be able to utilize at least 2 of the sources. If you're interested in seeing a sample end of course B, go ahead and take a look at that here. Also, here is a high scoring response from a student. You can see this is a couple pages long, around 3 to 4 pages usually. They have a clear introduction, context. They have their thesis here, just like we do in class. Their claims supported by the different sources. You can even see this a source A, source B with in-text citations. That is definitely an option for you there. So generally speaking, that is the overview of the end of course exam. And like I'd stated at the start of this video, definitely take a look at Google Classroom if you are struggling. I have this one pager linked in there. I have some sentence stems and a checklist if you would like to use that as a reference. And then I have some notes with steps if you would like to follow those as you're putting together your response over the next couple of class periods. Now, when do I want your end of course exam stuff completed? Please make sure you complete this by April 28th. which is Thursday this week. You will just write your responses on the response sheets on the lined paper that is provided for you, and then go ahead and put that into the blue bin by the door and turn in next to your period's name. Make sure your name is on that document as well. And then later this week and into next week, we will review, go over the end of course exam a bit more, and really see how we can grow our scores. If there are any questions, feel free to reach out to me via email. I will not see you until Thursday, or at least most of you, because of CMAS testing. So have a wonderful week and good luck on your presentations as well.